Welcome to the Troutwood Speaker Series. I'm Gene and I'm with Troutwood. Today we have a very special guest. My shirt, and for those listening just to the audio, I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt. That is a hint of where today's guest is from. Today's conversation is intended to share the experiences of a pension trustee with the goal of helping to remove the fear from finance and replace it with confidence. We're going to have a conversation understanding the role, what a pension trustee does. We're going to bridge that to financial education. Our guest, Vince Barfield, is a trustee of Hawaii, of the Hawaii Employees Retirement System, where he chairs the investment committee. Nearly $20 billion pension system managed on behalf of roughly 130,000 Hawaiian residents. Vince, welcome to the Troutwood Speaker Series.
Hey, thanks, Gene. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Vince, and I'll give the quick background for our audience. It's been a few years since we've seen one another, and last time I saw you was on the islands.
That's right.
Can you give, it's a pleasure, it's a privilege talking with you. Can you give our listeners just kind of a short background about yourself, the non-finance side of it?
Sure. I grew up in a military family, so born in Japan, raised on the East Coast of the U.S. mainland. Got to Hawaii in the middle of my teen years, finished out high school here, went to college at the university, got a finance degree, and then started my business and banking career, which spanned almost 4 decades, last 26 of which was with one of the largest banks here in Hawaii, publicly traded bank called Bank of Hawaii. And about the last 15 years of that, I served in the executive ranks there, and I ran businesses like the commercial real estate loan division, the trust company, the private bank, which managed our affluent clients, also oversaw our brokerage, our international private banking business, and a number of others. And then kind of on the sidelines there, I served in the military, served for 20 years in the U.S. Navy Reserve, and did that mainly in Hawaii. And most of that was on a part-time basis until 9/11 happened. And I actually left the bank for a year and served on the command staff here at U.S. Pacific Command, and then returned to the bank, as I said, about a year after that, and continued my banking career.
Vince, thank you for your service as well. And I understand that probably congratulations are due because you mentioned that career window and it recently ended.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be able to retire just a couple of years ago. So after nearly 4 decades of working, now I'm in retirement mode. And my big job is supporting the state through my role as a trustee in the retirement system.
And that is not a small role. We're going to dive into what it means to be a trustee for anyone who might be hearing that term for the first time, maybe hearing the term pension fund for the first time. Before we do, and that's going to be the rest of our conversation, are you good at being retired?
Oh, very much so.
All right, good.
I've worked continuously since I was 16 years old, so taking a break right now has been really refreshing. Although I'd have to say, we as board volunteers put in a lot of hours supporting the system. So there's a lot of effort that goes into it, but one that's well worthwhile.
Absolutely. Vince, can I ask what your first job was at the age of 16?
I worked actually on base, part of the Navy Exchange retail system. And so in the food service area, doing a number of different things, working in the kitchen, bussing tables, trying to earn an extra buck. And that actually helped me through my college years, which I continued until I graduated.
For anyone who maybe has never visited Hawaii, can you give us just a brief, what is it like living on the island, share a little bit of the cultural history?
Sure. I've been here for almost 5 decades, came here in my teen years, and then really had no intention of staying, but, went to school, met my future wife, got married, had a family, and then established a nice career. And, looking back, I can think of no better place to have worked, and raised a family than here. We're a small community, about 1.5 million in the state. Most of that's actually located here on the island of Oahu, where Honolulu, our capital, is. And I think the mix of, the Hawaiian culture, which is very family oriented, very focused on taking care of our environment, mixed with a very large representation of the Asian culture that immigrated here when we were an agricultural economy and we needed labor, and we contracted from many different countries in the Asia Pacific region to bring on that labor force. That's been integrated here, and we probably have one of the most culturally diverse states in the country. And what I find so fascinating is with that mix, that everyone gets along so well here. As I mentioned earlier, I grew up on the East Coast, spent a lot of time down south, and I saw some of the struggles that we had in race relations, and I just don't see that here in the islands. The ethnicities really mix very well. I often told visitors who came to the bank to support us from the U.S. mainland that the experience here and the culture here is probably where the country and the world wants to be. It's such a nice mix, and people get along so well.
Vince, I've never had a negative experience on the islands, and maybe the single best cup of coffee I ever had was the morning that we were preparing years ago for the event we did with clients of the banks and the financial education.
Well, we try to use locally grown coffee there in a lot of our bank functions. And so, Kona coffee or blends from that are very popular.
I've not been able to replicate it since.
Yeah.
Vince, so in your words, what is the Hawaii employees retirement system? And then I want to have our listeners, particularly our student listeners, high school and college students, understand what that means.
Sure. Well, the retirement system was formed almost 100 years ago in 1926. It was essentially established to provide retirement benefits for government employees that were working across the state. So it includes state employees in all of our major counties. And if you take the 4 major islands, each island is its own county, and they have their own county employee base. But the retirement system was the umbrella benefits organization that covered all of the county employees as well as state employees, and what's called a multi-employer plan. Our job in the system is to take care of administering those benefits, including all the financial assets. I think you mentioned at the beginning, that we're nearly a $20 billion system now. So it's a lot in assets that we've accumulated and that we're responsible for managing properly, so that we can ensure that when our government employees do reach retirement, they can be assured that they will have that monthly paycheck to help them sustain their living expenses once they're in retirement.
And a nearly 100-year history is a sign of a job well done.
Yeah.
If for a young person saying, boy, I've never heard that term pension before, how does someone get the opportunity to participate in a pension fund?
Yeah, we've actually had several iterations of what qualifies to participate. But, first, you have to be working as a full-time employee, and full-time where you're accruing benefits is anyone working 20 or more hours a week for the state or the counties. And then you have to be working that capacity for a certain number of years. And so the retirement threshold generally is 30 years of service and 60 years old in order to actually qualify for the benefit and start earning a pension. There is a shorter track there that you can gain if you're a little bit older. So that would be retiring at 65 with 10 years of service. And then some of the employee groups within our community might vary a little bit off those numbers depending on the type of job that they have. And if you take our police and fire departments, where it's a little higher risk. We do allow them to retire earlier, and so their programs
Mhm.
vary a little bit off of those numbers.
Two words you mentioned that I'd like to just get your definition on as well: benefit and pension. And within the
Uh-huh.
context of, if I work 20 hours or more
Uh-huh.
at 60, I qualify for these two things. How would you define both a benefit and a pension?
Well, after working those number of years and qualifying for retirement, you then can stop working and start generating that retirement check monthly without actually having come into the office, and enjoy some of the other things that you might want to do, travel and so forth. And be assured that you'll be collecting a pension check for the rest of your life.
That is no small thing, a pension check for the rest of your life.
No, it isn't. And it's actually rather exceptional in today's environment. When we started the plan, back in the 20s, and for the next, I'd say 60 years, it may have been the most prevalent form of retirement plan that was offered, fixed pension. Both governments as well as corporations offer that. But then, once we got into the 80s and since then, we've seen in the private communities that the alternative that is typically offered is a defined contribution plan rather than a fixed pension. And these are your 401ks, as an example. And this really is kind of change in responsibility, where the individual now has to take a lot more responsibility in managing their future retirement benefit. And so that, I think, really relates to this growing need for strong financial education, which, Gene, you're leading that effort for us, especially with youth. And that's why I actually think it's so important, this mission that you have in your organization, to help with that.
Thank you, Vince. There was a powerful comment you made. The individual must take more responsibility. You just got my curiosity as an individual. What can I learn from you and your experiences as a trustee, where you're in the boardroom? You've been helping to administer a very successful entity in the Hawaii ERS.
Well, one of the things that has opened my eyes in my years working with the state pension plan, and by the way, I've been a trustee for 10 years now. I'm in my second term. Is just the amount of highly qualified professional resources that we partner with in order to manage the plan. And they help us make sure that we're doing right by all of the members, and that we can shore up our finances and performance to ensure that we can deliver that pension check, for 30 years into the future. In the non-pension world, where the individuals have to take on that responsibility, it just, to me, shows such a great contrast between, what we see in the pension world with all the great resources, and the individuals who actually have to themselves marshal education and resources to help to lay out their own plans and start to put some of that money away and manage it properly.
The individual has to fulfill the role of the pension, the income for life that you had referenced.
Sure. That's right.
One thing I think is important to share, you had mentioned when you say the high quality professionals whom you have the opportunity to interact with, who do those high quality professionals ultimately work for? In the example of Hawaii ERS.
Well, they essentially work for the system, and we, as the governing body, the trustees of the organization, they work for us, and they help us administer various functions within the ERS. Probably the most notable being just managing the financial assets, the 20 billion or so. So we employ various consultants to help us structure our policy and strategy. We have a general consultant for certain specialized assets. like private equity and real estate. We have consultants in each one of those areas. We partner with a lot of different managers. We probably employ upwards of 50 plus managers in the system that manage various assets for us across our allocation spectrum. And these are, global managers, global consultants that, bring the best resources and skills to help us in Hawaii, manage our resources for our membership.
So those 130,000 members have these high quality, best in class caliber professionals working essentially to help them have that income for life.
That's right.
Have
That's right.
the benefits and the pensions. So I'm an individual and right now thinking, okay, boy, that sounds really good. I want what Vince just said, but I maybe don't have the option of a pension. Vince, does a Vanguard per se, or Fidelity, or Charles Schwab, or maybe those are even companies you're familiar with through the experience at ERS, an individual can gain that, at least a similar caliber of expertise. Is that fair to say? Not obviously the depth, but at least.
Yeah. I think you'll find that most of the major providers are very good about providing online education and resources that participants can use. I highly encourage that. We used Vanguard when I was at the bank, and they did a great job in support, both directly coming to visit us to provide education and guidance, but also with all their online options. The other thing that I think is really important, especially for young folks who are starting out and have the opportunity to participate in a 401k that their employer might be providing, is to take advantage of any sorts of added benefits through that program that the employer is funding. And many companies, they offer matching programs. So to encourage you to invest and save for your future, that retirement benefit that you're going to need once you hit 65 plus, the employer will match, certain level of dollars, and that can really leverage your savings pretty quickly. I think the challenge for young folks is just to maybe have that on scope in their 20s and early 30s when you've got so many other priorities of living your life, but you can't forget this future need that you're going to have, and having some discipline around that and taking advantage of some of what your employer might be providing you, I think is so important.
Company match is one of those firework terms where everyone listening, check that box, make it happen if you can.
Yeah.
I view, Vince, pension funds as perpetual in nature. They're designed to last long past us as individuals for future employees and future retirees.
Right.
You just made the comment that if we can get people younger in their 20s thinking, about these investment choices, it's not a one-to-one correlation. But if I, at the age of 22, choose to opt into a 401k and I'm looking at a 40 plus career and a 60 to 80 plus life expectancy, there's certainly an analogy to a perpetual nature that I can apply at that age.
Yes, you can. Yeah, absolutely. You can achieve the equivalent of what the old pension structure provided, but you've got to be disciplined about it, and you got to start early.
Discipline is that fair to say? That's one of maintaining the discipline I would put in the role of your role as a trustee. Is that fair to say? Managing the investment policy statement, keeping the managers and the consultants within the boundaries.
Right. Absolutely. That structure, the process, the oversight, the reporting, the risk reviews that we have, that all adds that element of discipline to make sure that we're doing what we need to keep the plan healthy, not only now but for the future, as our active employees retire over the next 10, 20, 30 years and are looking for that monthly benefit.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm an individual, I'm going to try my best to bridge the perpetual nature here. and I've got a 40-year career, and I'm going to say we live to 100 now. So I've got a 40-year retiree in my analogy. If I start investing at 20, work till 60, live to 100, the first 40 years are the growth component of your role with the pension and the ERS, that
Right.
assets have to grow for our future workers.
Right.
The next 40 years are the retirees, the spending policy piece. That when you say managing risk, you're managing a seesaw of younger workforce, retirees who need income, and that's the balancing act.
Yeah, that's a balancing act, and it's also continuous, right? We continually have new employees that are coming on board. So even if we're looking at it through today's lens, and we see that, most of our active force will be retired in 15 to 20 years, since our average active force is in their 40s, at that point, we're going to have a lot of new employees coming on board to serve the state. And so, their time horizon will be 30 years beyond that. So it's continuous.
Mm-hmm. I like to try to bridge expertise like yours and expertise from organizations like the ERS to decisions that we can make as individuals. I just love that simplicity, that approach. View your first 40 years as growth and your second 40 as conservative. Listen to Vince, hear from these experiences. It's not as scary as you might think it is.
Yeah.
So I had made that comment about boundaries, staying within the boundaries. And when I said boundaries, Vince, I was referring to the investment policy statement that ERS has.
Yeah.
How important would you view that document in terms of the success of the entity?
Oh, it's extremely important. It really lays out the game plan for how we invest in the assets for the ERS. It sets up the guardrails that our staff, our managers, our consultants are operating within. It also helps us as trustees ensure that we're operating within those boundaries, and that our reporting and our reviews of activity results reflect, that investment policy. And if you take the time and actually go to our ERS website, the policy statement is linked in there. It's probably 100-page plus document, but it lays out our approach pretty clearly, including our allocation and our risk-based approach. And I think it would be interesting reading for anyone.
Well, my students at Pitt are going to cringe at this, but we just gave them a homework assignment, Vince.
Okay.
So we've actually had our team members at Troutwood read these IPS statements, because one of the analogies I like to draw is individual personal financial plans can serve that same very important function that you just alluded to.
Right. Yeah, very much so.
And if we take time to read and understand from like an IPS, like Hawaii ERS, that's a big deal learning possibility. And it's accessible. I could go online right now, download it, and read it.
That's correct.
We'll be putting that in the show notes.
Okay.
Vince, is there a moment when the 10 years that you've been a trustee, is there a moment that makes you smile, or that you think back on and say, boy, was that impactful? Boy, did I learn a lot in that situation?
I'd have to say there probably wasn't an individual moment or an individual meeting, but I would say it may have been a theme. And if I go back and I think about the 10 years that I've been working with the plan, I started in 2011, which was, 3 years after the financial crisis, the great financial crisis. And we were still smarting from that experience, like many plans and institutions around the country. We took a big hit with the crisis, 40% hit in our portfolio. And in a pension plan that's even more impactful, because, it took us a number of years to recover from that. We knew we would recover, but the length of time it took us to recover was very impactful, because in a pension plan, we're distributing funds every year to our beneficiaries. So when you take a big hit like that and you're distributing funds, you never have an opportunity to recapture the return you lost on those funds you're distributing. So, taking a 40% hit in the portfolio, even though you might recover all of it in 3 to 5 years, has a negative long-term impact on our ability to keep the financial balance that we're trying to achieve. So when I came on board, that was the part of some very heavy strategic review that we were doing, and we wanted to structure policy and a strategy that would help us mitigate that. So we kind of switched from traditional asset allocation between equities and fixed income, and we took more of a risk focus. So we looked at our assets from the standpoint of how they were being impacted by risks across the spectrum, most notably, growth risk in the economy, and how that influences how our portfolio might react. And then we changed the structure to include some classes that would mitigate some of that risk in a severe downturn. So rather than take a 40% hit in a crisis like we did, maybe we could mitigate that to 25, 30%. And that's the approach we took. And then we redeveloped our strategy. We redeveloped our policy to reflect that. And we also had to reestablish some of our managers, even our investment team that works within the ERS. At the time that I joined, we only had one staff member who was supporting our investment function, so we relied heavily on our investment consultants. Well, today we've got 7 staff members, including our CIO. So, we feel a lot more comfortable that the decisions that we're making at the system level and among the trustees, we're managing and controlling ourselves versus, sharing a lot of that, let's say, with consultants. There's a much better balance today than there was previously. So, and I think that also helps us assure that we're on track and staying with the strategy and the policy that we've structured. So over the course of those 10 years, we did that. We kind of shifted strategy. We did more of a risk focus. We built out our investment team, and I feel real good about those accomplishments.
The more money that's going out the door, the longer the time period to recover from events like the Great Financial Crisis.
That's correct.
There's the concept of spending policy distributions. I know it predates you just a little there, but how big of a factor was stay the course, stick with it when we go through that kind of 08, 09 type period? You said 40%. Those aren't easy numbers to see on paper.
Yeah. Well, I think we run a pretty conservative plan, and so the stick to it meant that we had to. We weren't going to jump and try to jump ship in terms of our strategy at the time, or go chase returns in a higher risk environment. So we were pretty disciplined about that. Now, with my experience in other roles, I see a lot of variance in approach, and unfortunately, post or during the crisis, we did see a lot of folks who did jump ship, especially toward the tail end of it when the market was hitting rock bottom and they were jumping out of equities. And, they essentially lost the cycle back up when they were trying to play it conservative. And they lost out on having their portfolios return. And the older you are when you do that, the less time that you have to make that up.
And so you have said discipline multiple times, and I write it down on the notepad in front of me every time you say it, Vince. That is such an important word as we look to administer a system like ERS or our own individual 401k.
Right.
What's the bridge to financial education? How important is it in lieu of some of these changes that you referenced, or even in lieu if there aren't changes and pension funds are around forever?
Well, I think our system does a nice job in terms of offering education with regard to choices that employees have on various options that are available within our plan. And then, when they're getting close to retirement, we go through counseling to help them make the right choices as far as their benefit structure, when they retire. But, in most cases, people are going to need more than just their pension from the state to survive. And so looking at it more broadly, the need for financial education among our members is great. And some of this, they are going to have to achieve, through their own channels. And as we see, I think in the private communities, we see less and less of that, I think, happening. The lens I have is, of course, uh, much later in years. But as I reflect back, as far as the youth experience, I kind of look at it through my own children who are right now in their 20s. And my wife and I got a little concerned as they were about to leave the house after high school graduation and go off to college, and just thinking that, how are they fitted right now to take care of themselves, from a financial education standpoint. We felt that they were kind of weak in that area. That was also about the time that Gene and I first met you, and you were doing some traveling and support, in the investment world. But you shared with me some of your thoughts around education, and I really liked your missing semester book. And so that was something that I actually shared with all three of my children as they went off to their first year of college. And I thought that was really impactful for them. Um, I also felt it was important enough that in our business group at the bank, where we actually dealt with families, we had an event where we brought in dependent children who were in similar circumstance, and we had you come in, Gene, and talk to them. And I thought that was really impactful, and the feedback was really strong. And I just think it shows a need for that we have a lot of gaps right now, I think, out in the world, especially for our youth, where we don't have that. And I think we need to find some more options and consistent resources to provide it.
There was a lot that other organizations can learn from that event you are alluding to, Vince. I remember that we had two young employees from the bank do a Q&A for the
Mhm.
clients, and they were just two terrific um, young men who were very honest about their lack of financial know-how.
Right.
Um, that's is there a most common question that the ERS gets from their either trustee or not, excuse me, not trustees, but retirees or current workforce?
You know, uh, I don't think there's a common question. I mean, a lot of it is very personal for them on their own choices regarding, you know, their status in the plan, the years that they have left in order to achieve retirement, when that benefit kicks in, the options that they can choose as they go into retirement. Um, I think with regard to how we're managing the plan, and I think generally as we do education sessions, the feedback has been good. We try to keep them consistently informed. Again, if you go to our website, the members have access to all of our meeting minutes, our policy, our overall system strategy. Um, there's a lot of information that I think the members have access to, and so they can self-educate with regard to how we manage the plan. And if they do have questions, we're always available to answer them.
So Vince, I'm going to turn the tables on you a little bit.
Sure.
And if you and I were to reverse roles right now, which means that I would fly out to Hawaii and enjoy some time on the islands, and you would come here to Pittsburgh and teach my last class at the university. It's a personal finance class. What lessons would you try to instill upon those students with this 10 years experience that you have as a trustee of a gigantic pension fund, with your experience at Bank of Hawaii? What would you teach in that one class?
Well, we sort of touched upon it earlier, and that is, approaching your financial life with some discipline in planning for that event that's going to be 40 plus years into the future. And it's really hard to do. When you're 20 something, you know, it's very difficult for you to see yourself in your 60s at that point where, you're going to make that retirement decision and you're going to need some structure to your life then. And, you're not going to be getting that support through active employment. So you're going to have to have planned for this. And so achieving that discipline early, I think, is extremely important. And look for opportunities to do that. Whether it's through self-education, where you're doing that research, through online options. If you're employed, work with your employer and whoever the retirement provider might be. That will definitely have a lot of education tools for you. And map out your own journey, your own plan, but start early.
Start early. I hope every young person listening hears that. Time is a big part of the toolkit when it comes to investing.
Yes.
Vince, the final question I have for you, and it feeds a little bit off of that, and maybe just a kind of personal advice. Now you don't just have my students at Pitt, you've got every young person out there. And what would you say, kind of concisely, with what you know now, what wanted your younger self to know?
It's a complex world out there. And trying to find resources and partners to help you through it is important. So, making that effort to self-educate, use resources, through other parties that you can to support that process is important. And it's a continuous effort, what I did and learned in my 20s, I continued to build upon through each one of life's decades. And not only professionally, but personally, as my family expanded, the dimensions changed and the importance changed, focus changed. And actually, I think it naturally gets easier when you're in your 30s and 40s and you have a young family and you have a household budget and finances that you have to take care of. Things seem to come together a little bit more naturally. But before then, and where you can actually get a jump start in your 20s, if you can make that effort and have a little discipline around it, I think you'll be that much further ahead of the game.
Boy, it is a continuous effort and jumpstart yourself.
Yeah.
Excellent advice for every young person out there. Vince, I appreciate you. I appreciate, this conversation. I am excited to share the ERS investment policy statement. I hope that people take time to understand the wisdom that comes from documents like that and the pieces that we can apply as individuals to our own life. Please give my best to everyone on the island. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Troutwood Speaker Series.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Gene, and we hope to see you and your audience back in Hawaii maybe later in the year. We're not completely opened up yet, but we anticipate we will be. We've done a really good job of managing the pandemic here, and I expect the doors will be open later this year, and Hawaii is one of the best places in the world to visit.
I agree with that. My wife, when she hears that, is probably going to get on the computer to look for tickets. Vince, I'll share a fun analogy. I do a lot of planning sessions with high school and college students. And when we build the financial plans, nearly every time I put vacation to Hawaii and the students plan with their surplus cash. So I'll see what I can do to help that tourism as an industry.
Yeah, very good.
Vince, thank you. And everyone tuning in, thank you.
All right. Aloha.